Hi, everyone. I'm Ed Greenspon, and I'm delighted to be speaking in a couple of moments with two great guests who have much to say about how Canada can use this moment to go from boiling frog to leapfrog. Why are we calling this series Leapfrog? Well, because every crisis creates opportunity, of course. In fact, it often takes a crisis to clear away the distractions and jump on well-known opportunities. Boiling frog syndrome is a passive form of decline. A leapfrog is positive, action-oriented, and fixed on trying out new things. That leap is part of an innovation culture, a true innovation nation. What will it take for Canada to come out of today's geopolitical challenges more confident, more sovereign, and more prosperous? We'll discuss these vital matters today with John Risley, a legendary Canadian entrepreneur. John was the founder of Clearwater Seafoods. He invested in an offshoot that became the world's largest producer of omega-3 fatty acids, and then discovered there a prolific oil-producing algae. He helped bring MDA Space back to Canada. He is a proponent of building hydrogen and a proponent of building infrastructure in the Arctic. And just as important, he's a student of history, strategy, and leadership, so he has the capacity to put everything into context. And joining us from Deloitte is Jakub Uziak, a trade and economic policy advisor who works with businesses and government to navigate the complexities of global markets. So he's saying what they're saying. We welcome you both to Full Circle, the Leapfrog series.
Thanks, Ed. Great to be here.
Hey, great to be here, and I'm glad you described me as a student. That's exactly what I am.
Okay, the perpetual student. Excellent. So look, let's start, Mr. Perpetual Student, with trade diversification, which is obviously one of the main steps, main strategies being touted in managing the risk U.S. tariff and trade policies posed to Canada. And John, in the early days of Clearwater, you sold lobster off a pickup truck. Then you sold in the U.S., then in Europe, then in Japan, then in China. What lessons do you have for Canadian businesses as they think about diversifying?
That it takes time. The U.S. market is an incredibly competitive market, and not in all cases, but certainly in the case of our business, very humble business beginnings, was a price-focused market, and it's difficult to make money in a price-focused market when you're a newcomer. And so we had to go looking for markets that valued other things other than price, like consistency of supply, quality, year-round availability, all the kinds of things for which sort of price is not unimportant, but not necessarily the driving decision-making apparatus. And while we never walked away from the U.S. market, but we treated the U.S. market as the U.S. market treated us, right? U.S. market said, look, we'll deal with you when we want. And our attitude to the U.S. market is good. Okay, no problem. We'll deal with you when we want. You're not our primary market. That's not where we're going to focus. That's not how where we're going to sort of build our future. It's not how we're going to invest. And so, as you would know, obviously, the data says that Canada is hugely dependent on the U.S. I would not encourage anybody to walk away from their current U.S. relationships, despite them being challenging under the current administration. But do you need to get on your bike and develop relationships in other jurisdictions? Yeah, but it takes time. This is not other markets, whether they be in Europe or Asia, are not markets where you knock on the door and say, look, my price is X, and people will say, well, make it Y, and we've got a deal. I don't care what you're selling or what service you're offering, but it takes time.
Do you think, given that time seems compressed because of the pressures on the country and presumably on companies, is there a way to speed up the process in any way?
Governments can help open doors, but governments can't walk through them for you. You've got to walk through them yourself. So, yes, there is a way to speed up the process. And the way to do it is you've got to show early commitment. You've got to figure out what is it this market wants that it doesn't now have. What service can I provide that the market is is deficient around. And then what we did, and we did so incredibly naively, was we sort of did that by saying, okay, what is it that you want, Mr. Customer? And the customer told us, and without even understanding how we were going to respond to those requests, we said, okay, we'll do it. And, sort of people laughed and smirked. But I think what helped us a great deal, and I think still works today, is our customers understood we were trying really hard, right? We were investing. We were trying to do things with the physiology of the product. We were investing in storage facilities. We were trying to improve crop. We were working hard to deliver. And it probably took us years to get to the point where we could say we were fulfilling some of the promises we made. But the journey along the way was a journey during which the customer could see hard evidence that we were really taking their requests seriously. And I think that still works today. I don't care whether you're selling satellites or lobsters.
Jakub, with your clients, as you're out there talking to them, and in the context of the situation we're in now today, are they making these kinds of adjustments? Are they looking beyond American markets for exports and actually not just looking but doing?
Slowly, I think to John's point, it's not something that we can turn on a dime. I think for many companies, U.S. market is so close that I think many businesses got a little complacent, right? And the international markets were kind of more opportunistic. As John said, I think they require more time, more effort. But we are seeing, companies, John said, not move away from the U.S. necessarily, but maybe realize that the U.S. can be a source of growth for forever, right? And look for opportunities in Europe, in Asia, and in other parts of the world too that may be, higher kind of growth potential in the future. So yes, we're seeing that. I think when the tariffs were imposed, it accelerated that. And then since they've been paused, it's slowed down again. But I think that the need to diversify is there. So yes, we're seeing it, but I think it needs to be accelerated.
I listened to the two of you, and I'm going to take a guess at the expectation in the country that, currently we have about 77% of our exports go to the United States. And I think people kind of want that by next year to be 50%, and then maybe 30%. Obviously, that's not realistic. So, what is realistic? John?
Yeah, totally, Ed. The numbers you suggest are completely not reasonable or realistic. And doing business with the United States is easy for us. It's easy for us because we have sort of basically common laws. We have basically a common culture. Language is the same. Geographically, very easy. And Canada has got, obviously, in the United States, have long-standing ties, right? Everybody sort of vacations in the other's country, and we've got friends, and everybody has friends in each of those jurisdictions. So it's a natural place for us to be doing business. It's not natural to go to Munich. It's not natural to go to Tokyo or Singapore or Shanghai. And when you take a product or a service to the United States, the first question on the American customer's mind is, what's the price? That's not what's first on everybody's mind. I'm not saying price isn't important, but what makes your product globally competitive? Why should somebody in China or any other jurisdiction around the world do business with you? What do you have to offer that makes you unique other than price? So you need to understand what am I trying to sell here? Because what I'm saying is that while price is important, it doesn't start with price. So you've got to reimagine your business, and that takes time. That doesn't happen overnight, and it takes a deep understanding of the customer and the customer's ambitions, and even just selling, a product like a foodstuff. You go to London and you want to do business with, let's say, a premier food retailer in London like Marks and Spencer. It's they want to come and they want to see your plants. They want to understand your hygiene practices. They want to understand your capacity to deliver. They want to understand how good are you at product development. I mean, this is sort of a long interview, relationship building process, irrespective of the segment of the economy in which you compete. Now, if you're NVIDIA and you've got, the best chips in the world and everybody wants them, of course, that's a different category of doing business. But
Jacob, you wanted to come in here.
Yeah, maybe just a small note, and I think it keys off what John said. I think, in being more attractive to non-US customers, I think, it's been our kind of big plus, but also our big downside. A lot of our exports are kind of raw products, it's staples, right? Where it's hard to be different. It's hard to differentiate yourself. I think one of the things that we as a country need to focus on is moving up market, right? From selling kind of raw product to selling a finished product where you can demonstrate, value add and differentiate yourself from other suppliers. And to John's point, then make a differentiated product that somebody in Germany or somebody in Denmark will want to buy, because at the very staple level, you're essentially competing on price, right?
Yeah. So to pick up on what Jacob said, much of what Canada exports is in sort of a form, I don't like to use the word commodity, but is in a form that is then has value added to it. And that would be the case with their uranium. It would be the case with their oil, which is a very special grade and needs very special purpose refining assets in the United States to turn it into a useful product. And that's sort of up and down, if you like, the trading relationship between the two countries. So if you're one of those suppliers of one of those products that has value added to it in the United States, it's not simply that easy to sort of say, oh, well, I'm going to sell my product somewhere else. Does the value added capacity exist in those other jurisdictions? Are you wise to add value yourself and then take that value added product to the market other than into the United States or perhaps even in the United States? These are all very strategic questions which need to be asked before you can really set about seriously diversifying that supply chain. And it takes time. These things take a lot of time.
So if I just want to make sure I understand that right, because I think it's a very interesting point. So if a lot of the value is added in the United States and we want to become less dependent on the United States, then we need to bring some of that value add processing back home?
Yep. Or we need to find customers who are prepared to invest in that value-added processing capability in their own country so that we can continue to sell the commodity product. But let me give you what I think is a great example. So as you know, we are exporters of electricity from three provinces, basically, Quebec, Ontario, and British Columbia into the United States market, right? And we have the potential, and Prime Minister Carney has said he wants to turn Canada into an energy powerhouse. That's great. I completely concur with that strategic objective. So we can generate a huge amount of renewable energy. We can get more fossil fuels out of the ground, and we can do all sorts of things to fulfill that ambition. Okay, so what are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with all these electrons? Okay, Nova Scotia turns on its offshore wind. Newfoundland turns on its onshore wind. What's going to happen to those electrons? Well, the local market doesn't need them, right? So the right answer, in my opinion, is we've got to turn those electrons into a value-added product and export that value-added product. Right. And that could be green ammonia, it could be green hydrogen, it could be green steel, it could be biomethanol, it could be locating a data center that has got huge appetite for green electrons. Right. I mean, that's how we have to think. We just don't want to send our energy to the United States, who then say, hey, thank you for this abundant supply of cheap energy. Now we're going to use it and produce something of meaningful value to the economy. Right. We need to be thinking about doing that here.
I 100% agree. I think the policy focus for the government should be moving us up, from selling, like John said, commodity raw material products to making more value added products, right? Where we'll be further along the supply chain. We'll command a premium price for what we're selling, and we can be more picky about what we sell it, rather than just going to the US because it's easy.
Yeah, Jacob, it's not something we've done well as a country, I guess. And, forestry is a good example as a world leader. And then we've allowed value to get added in Scandinavia. Well, it's not that we've fallen behind others who've added greater value. I guess maybe that's because it's so easy to sell lower value products if you're in Canada sitting next to the United States, right?
100%. I think I've actually heard some business people say, tariffs and threat of tariffs, is a wake up call for us to do better and to wake up from our slumber of just, taking the easy way out.
Yeah. Well, that's the idea of the leapfrog, I think, as well, right?
Yeah. So, look, I think we have to understand that as we try to mature our economy, which is different from growing it, and we become more sophisticated and follow the trends that Jacob is advocating, we have to understand there's a role for what we do now. Let me give you an example of that. So my friend Jim Irving is a huge supplier of lumber to Home Depot in the United States. That is, he's adding value to his trees by producing lumber and then taking it to the United States, which you could argue the lumber itself is priced as a commodity. And yes, that's true. Obviously there are quality components of lumber that are important, but that's where the market is, right? So you can't ignore the fact that the United States is the world's largest economy, and it's got a voracious appetite for a whole host of things. So Canada, look, I argue here that this idea that we've got to diversify quickly is completely unrealistic. It's not going to happen. So if I were advising the government today, and I'm not saying I'm not trying to, and I don't know that they would necessarily want to listen, but I would be saying, look, we need to become more strategically important to the United States because it's a really important relationship to us. And so we need to make sure that we do away with this thesis that the president likes to advocate, which is there's nothing from Canada that we need, right? We need to turn that around so that the administration understands there's a whole bunch of reasons why we need Canada. Because as long as the United States needs us, we are going to have a completely different relationship from the one that where we can sort of be beaten up, if you like, as a trading partner that can be easily replaced. We need to put ourselves in a position with the United States where we cannot be easily replaced. And there's a whole host of things we could do. Examples of that would be, let's have a joint military base in the North with the Americans. Right? Our militaries have got along well. It's half the cost for us. It's half the cost for the Americans. And we cooperate with the American military now. Why not deepen that cooperation? That makes us more of an ally to the United States. It makes us more important to the United States. What are some of the other things that we can do? And I would advocate selling more energy to the United States, which has got a huge energy deficit coming. Right? I mean, we all know what's happening with the grid in the United States under enormous pressure. Electricity consumption is growing. Electricity prices are going through the roof. They're desperate for more energy. Canada can be a supplier of that energy. And whilst I would like to see much of that incremental energy be used here in Canada, as Hydro-Quebec has used their energy to spawn things like the aluminum industry in Quebec, we need to do the same thing. But exporting energy to the United States is not a bad thing. Why? Because there are huge infrastructure investments that go around that, and there's the so-called switching costs, right? I mean, it's a bit like an oil refinery dependent upon Alberta crude. They can't get a similar crude from virtually any other jurisdiction other than Iraq and Venezuela, anywhere in the world. And that's, there are all kinds of political issues around that. So they're very, very dependent on Alberta crude. And it's why the president didn't put the same tariffs on crude that he put on other products coming out of Canada. So where else can we develop a dependency from America on us that makes our trading relationship in the United States more important? While at the same time, and with emphasis on this point, we need to be hustling our butt around the world and selling our products and services in other jurisdictions.
the way I've been thinking about this and writing about this since January is that we have to have a two-track strategy. And track one is a long-term strategy to be less dependent on the United States. And track two is a medium-term and medium-term strategy to have greater access to the United States so that we can affect track one. And if we do that, then we'll be probably in a better bargaining position. We'll never be in a superior bargaining position to the United States. We'll be in a better bargaining position, presumably. So we have to walk and chew gum. Go figure.
Yeah, totally. And I couldn't agree more. And we need to, what we need to do is make sure that the community writ large understands that this idea that because we've got sort of challenges in the relationship with the Trump administration, that we need to sort of pick up our cards and walk home and go elsewhere. That's not going to work. We need to, you're saying exactly what I'm advocating, which is no. That's totally the wrong thing to do. We need to develop more strategic. We need to be more strategic in our relationship with the United States while at the same time, to your point, Ed, getting on our bike and selling our products and services in other jurisdictions around the world. We're a highly respected country around the world, and we don't use that.
Some people might counter, and there's a kind of nationalism that has been unleashed in the country, understandably, by what's going on. And some people say, well, look, we can't have confidence that they're going to take our stuff. They're not going to block us, that they're not going to, that our cars will continue to go over that border multiple times in the supply chain. So, what if we're not in control of the situation?
No, but I think, look, I'm not here to be critical of the U.S. administration. I don't want to do that. At the same time, I'm encouraging us to develop a stronger relationship with that same administration. But I do think that a sense of reality, especially with the Treasury Secretary, who I think has got a greater and greater voice in the U.S. administration, that, pragmatism rules the day here. And clearly, the U.S. stock market did not like this idea of reciprocal tariffs and the impact it was going to have on the economy and inflation. And I think the president has been awakened to that reality, and you have seen substantial climb down from some of those original sort of economy busting rules around ridiculous tariff levels.
Okay, Jakub, I'm going to come back to you in a moment with the policy question around government. John's opened up something I want to ask him about vis-a-vis a company he's been very involved with, MDA Space. And, MDA Space is a company that essentially you guys brought back into Canada. So I imagine there was a good business reason to do it. Given the kinds of pressures you're seeing and the pressure to manufacture more in the United States, can you imagine situations where you might have to, put more of the production facilities, let's say, into the United States?
Yes, unfortunately. If you want to do business with the American government's military arm, it's very hard to do so from anything other than a U.S. Physical production facility. However, and this is a really important nuance, if we've got a product which is globally beating technology, right, that the Americans really need, right? Prime example of that is, the president's thirst for something he's calling the Golden Dome project, right, which most of you will have heard of, right? And a bit like Israel's Iron Dome, I think that's the metaphor. So we actually, MDA, could contribute in a very significant way to the creation of a Golden Dome. So instead of our prime minister going off to Washington and saying, okay, well, yes, this is all going to be built in the United States, and, yes, we want to be part of it, so how big does our check have to be? The prime minister could go to Washington and say, actually, we can contribute to the Golden Dome, right? Because we've got a technology which you don't have. But we're not going to build that technology, and we're not going to contribute it from an American industrial base. We're going to contribute it from a facility or facilities in Canada, right? Because this is going to be Canada's contribution. So what is it super important that Canada do? It's super important that we have and we can keep world-beating technologies in this country. It's just, we can't be a mature economy if we're not the best at things. Not everything, but we've got to be the absolute best in some things. That brings the world to our doorstep, right? It gives us leverage. It's a reason for people to want to trade with us, not just simply because we've got lots of agricultural products, or we've got lots of uranium, or we've got lots of potash, right? We've got to be more than that. And the country has not been good in this area, as you know, Ed and Jacob. We've got to get good in this area.
If I can add, Ed, like I think, I work with a lot of technology companies in Toronto, Kitchener-Waterloo area, and most of them, to John's point, are built to sell and built to sell to U.S. buyers, right? And I think, that's something that, to John's point, I think we need to change, right? Like that technology for all those startup companies ends up moving to the U.S. and being incorporated and, improved there and becomes a U.S. technology. I think I agree with John. In addition to kind of the, raw material economy, we need to, become a better kind of technology, economy. We have the talent, right? All of the large U.S. technology companies have thousands of people working in Toronto, in Montreal, in Vancouver, but we're working for the U.S. companies, right? We need some more homegrown, leading technology companies, which we haven't had since BlackBerry. And we need the environment to be able to do that, which I don't know, Ed, if that was going to be a policy question, but that should be something that the government's focused on, creating that environment and the ecosystem for that to be a viable path and not just, to sell to the highest bidder in the U.S.
So that's very similar. You've gone down a road that that I wanted to ask a little bit about, in terms of if we are going to diversify, and again, in the businesses that you're speaking with, and we're going to move from to less of a north-south orientation, not no orientation, but let's sort of say more of a global orientation, more of both east-west domestically and globally, as well as north-south, and bring those into a different kind of balance with one another. What do we need government to do?
Yeah. So look, a great question. Hard to answer. So we need to attract talent. We need to grow talent in this country. We need to make it attractive to stay here. But we also need to make Canada an attractive place to attract talent too, right? And we are seeing in the United States now an environment which, is not particularly favorable for the research community. We need a very, very focused, directed immigration policy around attracting the world's top researchers, the world's top scientists, highly skilled people for technically sophisticated industries. We need to make this a very attractive jurisdiction for people to come to. That's number one. Number two, why wouldn't the government, to your point, Ed, what can the government do from a policy perspective? Given the environment I've just described, why wouldn't the government go to the country's top research institutions and universities and say, okay, we're going to let you attract, just to pick an example, because it's in my home, why wouldn't we go to Dalhousie and say, okay, you guys are really good at ocean research. We're going to let you hire 7 new top world-class researchers, right? And we're going to provide you for the funding to do that for, let's say, 5 years. And after that, you're on your own sort of thing. But, and do that across the country, across, various segments in the economy. We don't need to look far for lessons on the policy front to figure out how to grow an economy. And we've got the platform. My God, come on, let's take advantage of it.
Okay, Jacob, how are we going to take advantage of it?
I was just going to layer on to some of what John said. I 100% agree in more funding for universities for innovation, federally funded, research chairs to drive that innovation that Canadian companies can then use rather than, licensing technology and know-how from other countries. And then I think, your question, Ed, around, immigration and John's point around infrastructure are connected. If we want, more immigration, then we need to solve our infrastructure and our housing issues. Right? I think the two things are connected. Living outside Toronto, John's point around high-speed rail is a sore point for me. It's, Japan built high-speed rail in the 60s. France did it in the 80s. We're in 2025 and we don't have high-speed rail. We keep talking about this project from Windsor to Quebec City, but, I don't know how many years it's been, we've been talking about it, but there's been no movement. Let's make some small progress. Let's do Hamilton to Toronto, right? Like, think about all of the housing opportunities that there would be for new immigrants in Hamilton if they were half an hour away from work in Toronto instead of an hour and a half that they are right today.
Yeah. I'm struck as we get ready to wrap up here. I'm struck in some ways that that the conversation has turned to talent and how we nurture, attract, retain talent. What's high-speed rail about it? So it's about moving people around, not just for their work, obviously, but also for their work, new airports. It's to get people together to figure out things, to invent things, and that. And Johnny, a lot of what you're saying, you're talking about, research and development, and the companies you've been involved with have done a lot of research and development. Canada's not very good at research and development. At least our private sector isn't. So it's an interesting point of convergence.
We're not good at commercializing it.
Yeah.
We're not bad at research. We're just not good at commercializing research.
Okay, so that will be a focus. So when we start at trade diversification, we end with talent. It's actually a very natural progression of the conversation. Look, I want to thank you both. I got to most of our questions, which is good. I'm sure other people out there will have questions too. But, I just wondered with this, on a scale of 1 to 10, how optimistic are you that we can make something of this moment we find ourselves in and come out of it, for the better? Jacob, you go first.
I was hoping you would ask John to go first. Somewhere between 6 and 7 out of 10.
John, how optimistic should we be?
Yeah, so I would say I'm mixed emotions, and by that I mean I'm really super worried that we don't take advantage of where we are and the crisis that we find ourselves in. But I'm super optimistic that we've got a leader now who has not been a politician at any point in time in his life, has had an incredibly successful career, who's super smart, who's going to be, I hope, a demanding leader, who's not going to be afraid of taking risks, who is going to endorse the prospect and, in fact, the need for change, and is going to be willing to do new things and make mistakes. And that's how you grow. So I'm worried that somehow the system gazumps him and strips him of these sort of character traits that I think he brings to the job. And I hope that he's strong enough to resist them and impose himself on the country. The country needs great leadership, right? So we need that.
Okay, I'm giving the worrier in you maybe a 3, and I'm giving the doer in you maybe an 8.
Great.
There we go. Thank you both so much, John and Jacob. That's such an insightful conversation.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay, Jacob, we're back for a few minutes to do a little bit of a recap of what we just heard. What would your main takeaways be from the conversation with John?
I think John was pretty vocal on, diversification is good, but it doesn't mean we're walking away from the US, right? And I think, as we were talking just now, I think that's important for people to hear. Now, I personally do think, and I think John mentioned this as well, it's maybe, re-looking at that, that relationship. Can we, like John said, demonstrate our, how valuable we are to the U.S. economy, and can we change how we contribute? But, as a longer term strategy, we should look to diversify it. But as a short to medium term strategy, the US is the biggest market in the world. The economy will continue to grow. It's the population growth in one of the few countries in the world where it's going to continue to increase, right? So it's I think maybe it's not something people will necessarily like hearing, but I think that's the reality of our economy and our situation.
A doable proposition to marry the private needs of companies to the public need of the country, if you will.
I think that it's a tough one. I think, you mentioned a couple of times during the interview, this nationalistic, feeling that we have in Canada of, buying Canadian and reducing reliance on the US. I think, the business needs are slightly different. And I think that will likely come to the fore. But again, I think it's not an either nor strategy, right? I think we can do both. I think we can focus on Canadian made product. I think we can focus on diversifying while, still maintaining and potentially improving the relationships with the US.
All right, Jakub, thank you so much for being with us today, and good luck as you help others, adjust to these circumstances and, plan their strategies and implement them. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thanks for having me.
Trade diversification isn't just a nice to have, it's a national imperative, and it's going to take real leadership from government, yes, but in boardrooms and corner suites as well. Companies, not governments, are the ones who ultimately trade. Governments need to create the right conditions and incentives to encourage them in publicly interested directions, but the private sector has to pull it off. Thanks for listening to Full Circle, the Leapfrog series. We'll see you, or at least hear you, or maybe you'll just hear us next time. Thank you.